Welcome back, and welcome to Friday. Throughout the week, we have been exploring a question that, on the surface, seems remarkably simple. What actually matters? Yet the more we sat with the question together, the more we have discovered that it's anything but simple. Because for many of us, the problem has never been that life lacks meaning. The problem is that life has become full of competing demands, competing expectations, competing voices, and competing priorities that meaning itself has become difficult to hear. Earlier this week, I said something that I want to return to today. Sometimes we don't lose our purpose, we simply lose sight of it beneath everything else that we've been carrying. I think that's an important distinction because if purpose has been lost, we have to go search for it. But if purpose has merely been covered, then perhaps our work isn't to become someone new. Perhaps our work is to gently uncover who we have been all along. That realization changes everything. The illusion of more. I want you to imagine standing in a beautiful forest. The air is cool, the birds are singing, sunlight is filtering through the trees. There is absolutely nothing demanding your attention. For just a moment, notice what happens inside of you. For some people, there's an immediate peace. For others, there's discomfort. Almost an urge to reach for a phone, to check a notification, to see what they might be missing, to become productive again. That response fascinates me because it reveals something most of us never question. We have become so accustomed to constant stimulation that stillness can actually feel unfamiliar. Think about that. Not painful, not dangerous, just unfamiliar. Somewhere along the way, many of us began equating movement with meaning. If we were busy, we must be accomplishing something. If we are responding, we must be contributing. If people need us, we must be valuable. If our calendars are full, our lives must be important. But are they? Or have we simply become experts at staying occupied? There is a profound difference between a full life and a filled life. One is intentional, the other is accidental. One reflects choice, the other reflects accumulation. The weight we never chose. As I reflected on this week's core problem, another thought kept returning to me. Most people don't wake up one morning and consciously decide to live overwhelmed. No child dreams of becoming exhausted. No teenager imagines growing into someone who feels pulled in a dozen directions every single day. It happens gradually, quietly, almost invisibly. One responsibility, then another, one expectation, then another, one commitment, then another. Each one by itself seems reasonable, until one day you discover that your entire life has become a series of reactions. You're no longer choosing your days, you're surviving them. And because the change happens slowly, it rarely feels like something that happened to you. It simply feels like life. That may be one of the greatest illusions we collectively live under. We assume that because something is common, it must be normal. And because it's normal, it must be healthy. But those are very different things. Stress is common. That doesn't make it healthy. Chronic distraction is common. That doesn't make it healthy. Constant comparison is common. That doesn't make it healthy. Living in reaction is common. That doesn't make it healthy. Sometimes what we call normal is simply a habit that millions of people have accepted together. The quiet theft of attention. There is something I have become increasingly aware of over the past several years. Life rarely steals our attention all at once. It takes it in fragments. A notification here, an email there, a headline, a story, a conversation replaying in your mind, a future that hasn't happened, a past that cannot be changed. None of these moments seem particularly significant, but together they create something extraordinary. They create fragmentation. Imagine trying to pour water into 10 different glasses simultaneously. Each glass receives something, none receive enough. eventually everything feels incomplete. Many of us are living exactly that way emotionally. We are attempting to divide our awareness into so many directions that nothing receives our full presence. Not our work, not our families, not our creativity, not our health, not our spirituality, not even ourselves. And because we are everywhere, we never feel fully anywhere. Presence is becoming rare. I sometimes wonder if one of the greatest luxuries of our generation isn't wealth, or status, or success. Perhaps the greatest luxury is undivided attention. To sit with someone without checking your phone. To walk through nature without documenting it. To eat a meal while actually tasting it. To listen without preparing your response. To rest without feeling guilty. These experiences have become surprisingly uncommon. Not because they're impossible, but because we've forgotten how. We've become so skilled at doing multiple things simultaneously, but less practiced at completely inhabiting one moment. And here's the tragedy. Life only unfolds in the present moment. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, only here, only now. Which means every time our attention leaves the moment unnecessarily, a small portion of our lives goes with it. Success doesn't solve this. One of the reasons I care so deeply about this conversation is because I know many of our listeners are extraordinarily capable people. Executives, professionals, business owners, leaders, people who have spent decades learning how to solve problems. You've built careers, led organizations, supported families, accomplished goals that many people only dream about. And yet, somewhere beneath all of those accomplishments, there remains a quiet question. Why doesn't this feel like I thought it would? Not because you failed, because achievement and alignment are not the same thing. You can become incredibly successful at climbing a ladder, only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. That's not failure, that's awareness, and awareness creates possibility. The conversation beneath the conversation. You may have noticed that throughout this week, we haven't really been talking about time management or productivity or organization. Those are surface conversations. The deeper conversation has always been about consciousness. Because your calendar is never simply a calendar. It reflects your priorities. Your priorities reflect your beliefs. Your beliefs shape your attention. And your attention ultimately becomes your life. That's why I believe one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves isn't, what should I do next? It's, what is quietly directing my attention right now? Fear, habit, obligation, love, curiosity, compassion, presence? Because whatever answers that question is shaping your experience of reality. A moment of recognition. I'd like to invite you into a simple reflection. No need to answer immediately, just notice. When was the last time you felt completely present? Not productive, not entertained, not distracted, present. Perhaps it was during a walk. Perhaps watching your child laugh. Perhaps sitting beside someone you love. Perhaps watching a sunlight move across a room. Perhaps during meditation. Perhaps swimming. Perhaps hiking. Perhaps in complete silence. Notice something about those moments. Very little was competing for your attention. You weren't trying to become someone. You weren't trying to solve your entire future. You were simply there. Could it be that what you've been searching for isn't another accomplishment? Could it be that you're actually been longing for presence? Closing reflection for part 1. As we prepare to continue our journey together, I'd like to leave you with a thought that has been quietly growing inside me all week. Perhaps your life doesn't need more from you. Perhaps it needs more of you. Not more effort, not more striving, not more performance, More presence. Because presence is where relationships deepen. Presence is where wisdom emerges. Presence is where healing begins. Presence is where meaning quietly reveals itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, the life you've been searching for has never been somewhere else. Perhaps it's been patiently waiting beneath all the places your attention has wandered. In part 2, we're going to explore what may be the deepest question in this entire series. Who has been choosing what receives your attention? Because once we begin answering that question honestly, we don't simply manage our lives differently, we begin reclaiming authorship of them. Welcome back. Before we move forward, I'd like to invite you to resist the temptation that so many of us have, the temptation to immediately ask, what should I do differently after listening to this? That's the voice of our conditioning, the part of us that believes every insight must immediately become another task, another checklist, another project of self-improvement. Instead, I want to invite you into something much gentler. Simply continue noticing. Because awareness has its own intelligence. The moment we truly see something clearly, transformation has already begun. Not because we forced it, but because clarity changes the way we move through the world. You no longer have to convince yourself that a hot stove will burn you after you touched it. Recognition itself changes your behavior. The same is true of the inner life. Today, we're not trying to become someone new. We're allowing ourselves to see more honestly who has quietly been directing the life we're already living. The invisible authors of our lives. If I handed you a pen and asked you to write the story of your life, you would probably say that you're the author. And in one sense, that's true. You have made decisions. You have taken risks. You have worked hard. You've loved. You've suffered. You've persevered. But I wonder, how much of your story was consciously written by you? And how much was inherited before you were old enough to question it? Think about the messages you absorbed long before you knew they were even messages. Work hard. Don't disappoint people. Stay productive. Be successful. Make everyone proud. Don't waste time. Always be responsible. Keep going. Don't complain. Earn your worth. Never fall behind. Some of those messages may have served you. Some may have protected you. Some may have helped you build an extraordinary life. But here's the question. Are they still serving the person you've become? Or are they simply continuing because they've never been examined? One of the most liberating moments in a person's life is realizing just because a belief has been with me for decades does not mean it's true. Nor does it mean that it's still necessary. The difference between inherited priorities and chosen priorities. I often think how easy we inherit priorities without ever consciously choosing them. A culture tells us what success looks like. Our profession tells us what achievement looks like. Our families tell us what responsibility looks like. Social media tells us what happiness looks like. Advertising tells us what fulfillment looks like. Somewhere along the way, all of those voices begin speaking so consistently that they start sounding like our own. And that's when life becomes confusing, because we mistake familiarity for authenticity. We assume that because a thought appears in our mind, it must belong to us. But does it? Not every thought is your truth. Not every expectation is your responsibility. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every fear deserves your belief. Not every invitation deserves your yes. That realization can feel incredibly freeing and a little unsettling. Because if those voices aren't truly yours, then who are you beneath them? The quiet addiction to urgency. There's another pattern I've noticed in myself over the years. Perhaps you'll recognize it also. Urgency has a way of disguising itself as importance. An email arrives. It feels urgent. A notification appears. It feels urgent. Someone asks for your help. It feels urgent. The news tells you something demands your attention immediately. Urgent, urgent, urgent. Eventually, your nervous system begins living as though everything matters equally. And when everything matters, nothing is seen clearly. Have you ever noticed how a smoke alarm responds? It has one job, to alert us to danger. Imagine if it sounded every 5 minutes, whether or not there was a fire. Eventually, you'd stop listening. That's what many of us have unknowingly done in our own nervous systems. We've conditioned ourselves to treat every demand as equally significant. No wonder we're exhausted. No wonder we're anxious. No wonder we struggle to hear our own inner wisdom, because wisdom rarely shouts. Urgency always does. Attention is a form of agreement. This may be one of the most important ideas I've ever shared on VybeShift. Your attention is a form of agreement. Every time you repeatedly give your attention to something, you are quietly saying, "This deserves space in my life." You may not recognize you're making that decision, but you're making it nonetheless. Think about worry. Every time we repeatedly rehearse the same fearful scenario, we strengthen its presence in our inner world. Think about resentment. Every time we replay an old hurt, we invite it to continue living in the present. Think about comparison. Every time we measure ourselves against someone else's life, we reinforce the illusion that our worth depends on keeping pace. Attention feeds experience, not because attention magically changes reality, but because attention shapes the reality we consciously inhabit. The question isn't merely, what am I paying attention to? The deeper question is, what kind of inner world am I building through my attention? The courage to disappoint expectations. This next idea may feel uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who has spent much of their life being dependable, reliable, responsible, helpful. Many of us have quietly built our identities around meeting expectations. We become the dependable employee, the reliable spouse, the responsible parent, the helpful friend. Those are beautiful qualities until they become unconscious obligations, because eventually something begins happening. You stop asking, what is mine to carry, and begin carrying everything. Not because it's yours, because disappointing someone feels unbearable. But here's something life has been gently teaching me. Every meaningful life eventually disappoints someone. Not because it's selfish, but authenticity cannot simultaneously satisfy every expectation placed upon it. If you spend your entire life making sure no one else experiences disappointment, there is one person who inevitably will. You. That realization isn't permission to become careless, it's permission to become honest. Become the observer. One of the most transformative practices I've discovered is astonishingly simple. Observe. Observe your thoughts. Observe your emotional reactions. Observe what instantly captures your attention. Observe what repeatedly pulls you away from the present moment. Observe what leaves you feeling expanded. Observe what leaves you feeling contracted. Observation creates space, and space creates freedom. When we stop immediately believing every thought, we regain the ability to choose our response. That is where self-empowerment begins, not by controlling the mind, but by no longer assuming every mental event deserves our participation. Imagine standing beside a busy highway. Thousands of cars pass. You don't chase every one. You simply watch them. Thoughts are remarkably similar. Some deserve your attention, many simply pass by. Wisdom is learning the difference. Reflection before part 3. As we prepare for the final part of today's journey, I'd like to leave you with one final reflection. Perhaps the question has never been, how do I fit more into my life? Perhaps the wiser question is, what no longer belongs in my attention? Because every unnecessary burden you release creates room for something essential. Every expectation you question creates room for authenticity. Every unconscious habit you recognize creates room for freedom. And every moment of genuine presence brings you one step closer to the life that was quietly waiting beneath all the noise. In part 3, we're going to bring this entire week to its culmination. We'll explore what it means to become the conscious author of your life once again. Why presence is the doorway to meaning. How this week's journey connects to VSP number 4 in the growing VybeShift Core Problems Library. And why the conversation continues in this week's Vibrational Stage podcast. Because recognition is only the beginning. The life that emerges from recognition is where the real journey begins. Part 3. I finally realized not everything deserves my attention. Welcome back. We've arrived at the culmination of this week's journey. But before we move toward a conclusion, I'd like to offer something that may seem a little unusual. I don't want you to think about changing your life, at least not yet, because one of the subtle traps of personal development is that every insight immediately becomes another project, another goal, another habit, another expectation, another opportunity to judge ourselves for not changing fast enough. That isn't what VybeShift is about. Transformation isn't something we force. It is something we allow. A flower does not bloom because someone pulls on its petals. It blooms because the conditions become right. Awareness is one of those conditions. Presence is another. Compassion is another. And perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves is permission to stop trying to become someone else long enough to rediscover who we already are. That is not a passive process. It is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. What if nothing is wrong with you? I'd like to ask you a question, one that I hope you'll continue carrying long after this episode ends. What if nothing is wrong with you? Not that everything in your life is perfect, not that there isn't room to grow, not that there aren't habits worth changing, but what if the exhaustion you've been feeling, the uncertainty, the sense of being pulled in every direction, the quiet ache that whispers, there has to be more than this? What if those experiences are not evidence that you're broken? What if they're evidence that your deeper self has been trying to get your attention? Think about physical pain. Pain isn't the enemy. Pain is information. It tells us something requires care. Emotional discomfort often serves a similar purpose. It doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong with you. Sometimes it means something inside of you is asking to be heard. Perhaps you've been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how do I stop feeling this? What if you asked, what is this feeling trying to show me? That simple shift changes your relationship with your entire inner world. Life isn't always teaching. One of the foundational ideas beneath VybeShift is that life is not simply happening to us. Life is continually revealing us to ourselves. Every difficult conversation, every unexpected setback, every success, every disappointment, every relationship, every season, each one offers a mirror, not a judgment, a mirror. The mirror simply reflects what is already there. It doesn't create it. When life feels overwhelming, perhaps the mirror is showing us where we've been living beyond our own capacity. When life feels empty, perhaps the mirror is revealing where we're confused achievement with fulfillment. When life feels scattered, perhaps the mirror is inviting us back to what is essential. Life is always communicating. The question is, have we become quiet enough to hear it? the wisdom of presence. Over the past several months, as many of you know, I've spent a great deal of time hiking. Not because hiking solves life's problems, but because nature has a remarkable way of slowing the mind enough for wisdom to emerge. I've noticed something. The forest is never in a hurry. The trees don't compare themselves to one another. The creek doesn't apologize for moving at its own pace. The birds don't wonder if they're singing well enough. Everything simply expresses its nature. There is an extraordinary lesson in that. Human beings are perhaps the only creatures who spend so much energy trying to become someone other than who they are. We compare, we compete, we perform, we strive. And while ambition has its place, constant performance eventually disconnects us from presence. Nature reminds us that growth doesn't happen through consistent urgency. It happens through seasons, through rhythms, through patient unfolding. Perhaps you've been trying to force a season that isn't ready yet. Perhaps what looks like standing still is actually deep rooting. Reclaiming the author's pen. Earlier in today's episode, I asked a question. Who has been choosing what receives your attention? I'd like to return to that now. Imagine your life as a book. Every day, another page is written. Most people assume that the chapters are written by circumstance, by other people, by obligations, by careers, by finances, by expectations. And certainly those things influence the story, but they do not determine its meaning. Meaning emerges through awareness, through interpretation, through the choice we make within our circumstances. The greatest shift I have experienced in my own life was realizing that I could not always choose what happened, but I could become increasingly conscious of how I participated in what happened. That realization gave me something back that I didn't even realize I had surrendered. Authorship. Not control. Control is an illusion. Authorship is participation. The author doesn't control every event. The author chooses how the story is told. You are not powerless. You are participating. The question is, are you participating consciously? A weekend invitation. As we prepare to close this week together, I'd like to offer you a simple practice. Not homework, not another assignment, an invitation. Sometime this weekend, go somewhere quiet. Perhaps your backyard, perhaps a local park, perhaps your favorite hiking trail, perhaps simply a chair beside an open window. Leave your phone behind if you can. Sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes. Don't try to meditate. Don't try to solve your life. Don't even try to think positive thoughts. Simply observe. Notice what repeatedly asks for your attention. Notice what keeps interrupting your peace. Notice what stories your mind continues telling. Then ask yourself 3 gentle questions. Number 1, what genuinely deserves my attention? Number 2, what has simply been demanding it? And number 3, and what becomes possible if I begin choosing the difference? Don't rush the answer. Some questions are too important to answer quickly. Introducing VSP number 4. One of the beautiful things that has emerged through creating VybeShift is the realization that these weekly conversations are not isolated experiences. They are a part of something much larger. This week marks the release of VybeShift Solving Process number 4. Each VSP begins with a single core problem. Not because we believe one conversation solves everything, but because every meaningful transformation begins with recognition. Recognition leads to awareness. Awareness creates understanding. Understanding opens the door to different choices. And over time, those different choices become a different life. VSP number 4 takes everything we've explored this week and expands it into a deeply immersive transformational experience. Not another course, not another motivational program, a guided journey into one of the recurring struggles so many thoughtful, high-performing people quietly carry. The growing core problems library. As I look toward the future of VybeShift, I become increasingly excited by what is beginning to emerge. Not simply individual podcasts, not simply individual VSPs, but an entire core problems library. Think about that for a moment. Throughout our lives, many of us encounter the same core struggles over and over again. I can't turn it off. I never feel finished. I'm pulled in every direction. I don't know what matters anymore. These aren't random experiences. They're recurring human experiences. The Core Problems Library is being created so whenever one of these seasons appears in your life, you'll know exactly where to turn. Not for someone to tell you what to think, but for someone to walk beside you as you discover what is already true within yourself. Because transformation isn't about accumulating more information. It's about recognizing yourself more clearly. And I have a deep feeling that this library will continue to grow for years to come, becoming a trusted companion for people navigating the complexities of work, leadership, relationship, identity, purpose, and the human experience itself. Vibrational Stage Podcast Teaser. If today's episode stirs something inside of you, I believe you're going to love where we're headed next. Because the VybeShift podcast is intentionally designed around recognition. It's the place where we pause long enough to recognize what we're experiencing and why it feels so familiar. But recognition is only the beginning. On the Vibrational Stage podcast, we go deeper, much deeper. This week, we're exploring how identity itself is quietly shaped by achievement, culture, family, expectations, professional success, inherited beliefs, and unconscious narratives. We'll ask questions like, who was I before I learned who I was supposed to become? Which parts of my identity are truly mine? What happens when awareness begins dissolving the stories I've unconsciously been living? These aren't conversations about fixing yourself. They're conversations about rediscovering yourself. The VybeShift podcast helps you recognize the experience. The Vibrational Stage podcast helps you explore the architecture behind the experience. Together, they create two halves of the same transformational journey. Your invitation. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to continue the journey. Join us on the Vibrational Stage podcast, where we slow down, ask deeper questions, and continue exploring what it means to live with greater awareness, intention, and authenticity. You can continue the journey by following the link in the show notes. Until next week, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Perhaps the life you've been searching for isn't hidden somewhere in the future. Perhaps it isn't waiting behind one more promotion, one more accomplishment, one more breakthrough, or one more perfectly organized calendar. Perhaps it's been quietly waiting beneath all the noise, waiting beneath every expectation you inherited, waiting beneath every obligation you've carried longer than necessary, waiting beneath every story that convinced you your worth depended upon doing more, producing more, becoming more. Because beneath all of that, there's still someone who knows how to be fully present. Someone who still knows wonder. Someone who still recognizes beauty in a quiet morning, a walk through the trees, the laughter of a child, the warmth of conversation, and the silence between breaths. That person has never left. They've simply been waiting for enough quiet to be heard again. And perhaps that is the greatest realization of all. Not that you've lost yourself, but that you've never truly been gone. You've simply been giving your attention to everything except the place where your own life has been unfolding. So this weekend, be gentle with yourself. Become curious instead of critical. Choose presence over performance. Choose awareness over urgency. Choose intention over reaction. And when life inevitably begins asking for your attention once again, remember this simple truth. Not everything that asks for your attention deserves it. But the people you love, the values you cherish, the quiet wisdom within you, and the life that is unfolding one precious moment at a time, those always do. Thank you for walking beside me this week. Until next time, keep shifting, one recognition, one moment of presence, and one conscious choice at a time. I'll see you next week on VybeShift.